So here we are. Oops, don't need these. Thank God. So here we are for more Bhagavatam. We got up to the part where Krishna's returned to Dwarka. And, okay, so he made his way back from Hastinapur to Dwarka. And then arriving, hang on, let me arrange some things. Then arriving in his city, he was greeted by all different kinds of citizens. So you get to see what kind of a environment Supreme Enjoyer would live in. And then returns to his family palace. And then greets his mothers especially, and then goes into his private sections of the palace, and you hear about all of his wives. Then one of the sages says, "What's this dude that you're talking about? Krishna. He's just like a regular married guy. Like, what's the big deal?" Now, so this is a certain dynamic in spiritual circles, which is if you're regular, then you're not so special. That's the dynamic. So like if you're married or if you have a job, then what's spiritual? You're not so spiritual. So it's a similar dynamic. They're thinking, this is Krishna. Why is he like married and like doting on his wives and so consumed with spending time with them and blah, blah, blah. He's a regular nice guy, like a regular materialist. So what's that? How can this guy be Bhagavan? So the answer from Sutta. The answer from Sutta is, one second. So the question again, how are we to understand that the Supreme Being who is absolutely impartial and omnipresent becomes like a common man absorbed in wives and children? The Supreme Being is supposed to be omnipresent, super divine, and impartial, not have really partiality to relationships, likes and dislikes. So how is he acting like a regular guy? That's the question. Sutta's reply. By his own magic, Krishna appears to be within our world. So that's one important thing. Atma-maya is the term used in Bhagavad Gita. Atma-maya, by his own magic. So there's no difference in how Bhagavan Krishna manifests his form and the way you and me manifest the form. There's no real significant difference to your body and God's body. The only significant difference is under whose design it manifests. For you and I, it manifests, for both of us actually, for us and for God, it manifests as a result of our will. We manifest a form as a result of our will because we want to interact with things. But because our will is slightly out of touch with reality, we don't have a clear concept of what we actually are, then our will encounters mistakes in interacting with reality. And so then it starts to generate the result of mistakes start coming to it. And so the kind of form that it's able to manifest is then influenced by the results of those mistakes in the past. That's called karma. That's called bad karma. And it could also work kind of good. Relatively good mistakes, relatively bad mistakes. So our body that we currently have is not really manifest directly by our own magic. It's by our own magic in cooperation with the Supreme's magic and under the momentum of all the previous ways that we've been using that magic over countless lifetimes. and during this lifetime as well. The way you lifestyle choices and so forth, since you were born, affect your health and so forth, appearance. So the end result is that we're not really, after billions of years of racking up all that momentum of mistaken activity and mistaken identity, then we're not really all that much in control of the bodily form that we manifest, which is why you can't get rid of a disease when you get it, for example. Or it takes a long time, or you can get it even though you don't want to. Whereas for Bhagavan, the form is directly manifested directly by his own magic. Hopefully you see the difference there. It's basically essentially the exact same thing the way consciousness manifests a form, whether it's the original consciousness or a dependent consciousness, whether it's you or whether it's God. It's the same basic mechanism involved in consciousness manifesting a form. But if the consciousness has been involved in a mistaken, if it has mistaken perception, then the forms which it generates gather more and more momentum of those mistakes and then become less and less out of its control. Bhagavan doesn't have, or any living entity who doesn't have mistaken conception doesn't have that problem. So when Krishna manifests a form, etc., it's by his own magic. So that's one way in which it's different from a common man. It's because he wants to do this, because it's fun. Whereas for us, that's our original intention. Our original intention is we want to manifest this form because it's fun. We want to see the colors, taste the tastes, etc. But it's mixed up now with all this momentum of previous mistakes that we made. That's not the case with him. He seems to be, now the sutta continues, he seems to be, and I like this description, he seems to be the central jewel on a beautiful necklace of exquisite women. This is what Krishna seems like. It's a great description. Like the central jewel on a beautiful necklace of exquisite women, but these women are also not from our world. So what he's saying here is Krishna is not from our world. He's appearing in the world with his own magic. So in other words, Krishna is not a product of the karmas that generate this world. Though he's coming here as an avatar, the way that he manifests his form and identity and being and activities is different than us because it doesn't have the momentum of past mistakes. It's manifest directly from his will, and also all these people that he's interacting with, all his wives, etc., are the same. So it just seems like he's this like big playboy, Don Juan, with thousands of women around him, like a classic figure like Don Juan or something, but it's not really the case because he's not a member of this world, and neither are all the people that are around him. So to read you that full paragraph, it says, by his own magic, Krishna appears to be within our world. He seems to be the central jewel on a beautiful necklace of exquisite women. But these women are also not from our world. They are manifestations of his all-attractive energy. You see, this is the concept that Krishna is not just one individual being. Krishna is Krishna with his all-attractive energy completely around him. So he never appears just by himself, just like you'd never really have a beautiful jewel hanging out by itself in a jeweler's place. It's beautiful when it's on a ring or when it's on a necklace. Thanks, Lee. Even the god of romance is overpowered by the limitlessly exciting, pure emotions expressed through the lovely smiles and flirtatious glances of these exquisite spiritual women. So now Suta's going to explain who these women are. And what does he say? He says, now we have this thing called Cupid. It's a Roman concept of Cupid. It's coming back from a Vedic concept of Kama. There's a god called Kama. And so now they're referring, which is not the Valentine's chubby Christian saint, Christian angel looking guy, but he's the god of lust and love and sex. That's who Cupid is originally too. But even the god of romance, to put it in a PG-13 way, Even the god of romance is overpowered. So the god of romance is Cupid's thing is he has the flower arrows. These arrows made out of flower, and if you get hit by them, then you're smitten with lust and love, desire. So even that person who's fully in charge of lust gets overpowered by lust, or gets overpowered by, wow, I am not in control of this. This is the point. The god of lust is in charge of all the material lust that happens, and sex and all that kind of stuff. That's Kamadev or Cupid. But when he sees the women that interact with Krishna, he gets confused and overwhelmed. It's not in his jurisdiction. He's not managing these affairs. These things aren't happening as a result of his rules and systems of actions and reactions. Even the god of romance is overpowered. And that's one statement. And the other thing is that they're way beyond him. The quality and content of the romantic affairs between Krishna and his wives are far beyond the quality and content of the affairs between men and women in this world, although they are pretty much exactly the same thing in form, but in substance and quality, they're light years apart. Such that the god of lust and sex becomes amazed by how these women can smile and glance and flirt, and how exquisite they are. Seeing them, that Cupid gives up his bow. He's like, what use is this? Thinking it powerless and useless by comparison. His bow is useless compared to their eyebrows and their smiles. They have the other kinds of bows. They're Dhanudhara and Dhanudhari. They have bows and they shoot arrows. So when Cupid or Kamadev sees those bow and arrows, he thinks, my bow and arrows are useless. But now, and then Sutta says, but Krishna is not overpowered by these infinitely intoxicating women. So the god of lust, so the question was about Krishna, right? He seems to be a regular guy who's totally like henpecked, whatever you call it, when the guy is just like becomes a puppet to the woman. So that's what Krishna is acting like. And that's what he's like. But the sage is asking about it. Like, why? What is that? That's not commonly thought of as like a big man, strong man, right? So now Sutta is saying, this is not material affairs here. The god of the whole material lust is confused about this. It's way above his head. Just when he looks at Krishna's wives, and Krishna's wives are completely feel like that. The way that the god of lust feels about them, they feel about him. Ordinary people, Sutta continues, are tied up in ignorance and stupidity, and they think everyone else must be just like them. This is just the way that subjectivity works. You can only see the world through your own mind. You can only see the world through your own mind, so the kind of perceptions and conceptions that you have in your mind, you see in other people in the world. So he's saying when people look at Krishna, they're going to see Krishna through their own mind. So that's why they think everybody else, when they see him do something that looks like what they do, they think that it's the same thing. Thus, they think that the unattached is attached. They can't comprehend what he's really doing, because it's too much like what they do. Even though he places himself in the midst of his magic, he always remains fixed in his true self and is never swept away by his own power. So think about this. When you are in the world, you're existing, you've manifested a form, like we said, as a result of incomplete comprehension of the self, right? As a result of incomplete comprehension of the self, we've manifested a particular form, and we're in the world in a particular way. So we're actually outside of ourself in the world. And this is why it feels overwhelming, and this is why you get attached and bogged down. the more you interact with the world. But that's not the case for Bhagavan or any enlightened person, including all the wives and family members of Krishna and all the citizens of Dwarka. They're they manifest their form without the influence of incorrect conceptions. Therefore, their form is the true being. They're actually situated in themselves, in their form. The form is themselves. This is what people are actually trying for. Anyway, the new kind of recent movement of, be your body, embrace your experiences and your sensations. It's a part of that basic drive that is what the soul should be. It should be its body. And that's the case for Bhagavan, and that's the case for people who are not ignorant about reality. So what he's saying is Krishna is manifest in his own self, in his own reality. He's not swept away by anything or attached to something external to him. So he's placed in the midst of his magic, therefore he's fixed in his true self. And he's never swept away. Even those who wisely take shelter of Krishna acquire this quality. Not just Krishna has this, but even those who take shelter of Krishna have this quality of being able to be like a duck in the water that doesn't get wet by it. Ordinary people think Krishna, the Supreme Master, is weak, foolish, and on the leash of his wives, but their opinion about the husband is of no importance at all. That's what Sutta said. So it's like, some people are going to, and this is a great attitude to have sometimes, it's just like, well, that opinion is of no importance at all. Because it's from a person that just doesn't understand. Raghavar, I'm reading my translation of Bhagavatam, which is called Beautiful Tales of the All Attractive. Make sense? It's Tim Cohen, it's Trivikram. He's back. See, I tagged him on Facebook and he came back. Thank you, Triv. He wants to know how we might connect this to Lord Nrsingadev. Why? What? Because it's like a holiday now? You want everything connected to Lord Nrsingadev? Basically, it's the same bhava. You just get with Nrsingadev, you're not going to see the Madhur bhava. You're going to have this very highly Aishwarya bhava, but basically it's the same love. That the way that he acts with Prahlad and the way that he's acting with, what's his name? Hiranyakashipu. Raghavar wants to know how many bhavas there are. There's infinite bhavas because a bhava means a state of being. So there's infinite bhavas because there's infinite people. There's infinite individuals, but you can categorize them. Hey, Balaram Shakti is even here. I'm so psyched. So you can categorize bhavas into, and there's 5 basic major bhavas, and then there's 7. I can't remember the secondary bhavas. But basically there's 5 bhavas. We'll probably talk about that at some point. But not right now. Let's move, unless you really want to. The 5 basic bhavas are selflessness or Shanta. Nrsingadev, Tim Triv wants to know if he's got a wife, of course, Lakshmi. It's the basic bhava, which is inherent in all of them, is selflessness. Bhava means how you relate, your state of mind in relating with things. So the basic thing is selflessness. This is at least for spiritual bhava. And then above that is inclination. Is it called affection? It's called priti, and it results in dasya, or wanting to do something for somebody. So it's active love. Starts with the desire to do something for somebody else's sake. And then you have priyata. Oh no, that's the 5th one. Sakya, which is the feeling of sameness and pureness. It's not as inferiority anymore. It's a confidentiality and an equality. And then you have a feeling of protectiveness, which is a bit more developed. This is how the bhavas develop, which is typical and parental love. And then you have above that the most complete bhava, which is romantic, because it includes protective, equality, and subordination. It's got them all on the foundation of selflessness. Yeah, that's a good one, Bardo. I think he's got one. He's not that into the Madhurya Bhava. Is bhakti a form of bhava? Bhakti is, yeah, basically, the bhavas are forms of bhakti. Bhavas are flavors or varieties of bhakti. Bhakti is love, and bhava is the type of love. Like, yeah, bhava are the stuff that happens in the mind, the emotions and stuff like that, and they're in different categories. You got to study Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu for that to understand that. It's there's basically sthai bhava is the most important one, which is the permanent bhava, which is the thing I was just talking about. All right, guys, let's now look at the next chapter. Any more questions about this? It's a heavy duty revelation. It's important. If you don't get it, if you're still finding yourself thinking, wow, this is quaint. They're talking about God in an anthropomorphic way, and he's doing things with people. It's how silly and anthropomorphic, but it's kind of nice and cute. If you're still feeling like that, then you haven't really understood what Sutta just answered here. Martin wants to know if there's 5 bhavas in Vaikuntha. There's 5 bhavas everywhere. But the prominence in Vaikuntha is Dasya Bhava. Oops, gotta plug it in. Let's. How long have we been going so far? Bardo's asking for a Q&A. All right, let's turn it over to Q&A. You got more questions? You might have more than one trip. I don't know about Shringadev very much. But if you hang around and we get up to part 6, you'll get the description of Nrsingadev from Bhagavatam. Alrighty then, there's no... Okay, good. So let's start the next chapter. So here, the next chapter is... Do you remember why this whole thing has come up? So just to backtrack and kind of rewind. Let me just close this. To backtrack and rewind the story, we got the advent of Kali Yuga. Sages go to the forest to try to figure out how they can help the people in the coming age. Along comes a young sage named Sutta, and they all love him. And they say, great, you can be the leader. Here's our question, what should we do to help the sage? And Sutta says, well, people have to understand Krishna. And they say, okay, good, explain to us about Krishna. And then he says, okay, I'll explain to you the Bhagavatam then, because that's what explains Krishna. Vyas wrote it, and he taught it to his son, Shukadev. And then I learned it from Shukadev by sitting there while he was explaining it to this emperor, Parikshit. So now I'll tell you what I learned from Shukadev. And they said, great. But first, who are these? Give us more background about these people. We know about Vyas, but why did he write this book? When did he write it? How did he write it? Etc. And so in answering that question, we got the story of how Vyas wrote all the Vedas, compiled all the Vedas, and how eventually Narada Muni had to come to help him finish up the job, and then he meditated and was able to comprehend Bhagavan clearly enough that he could explain it in the Bhagavatam. Then the sages were like, that's really cool. Now we want to know about Shuka and Parikshit, the Vyasa's son, who was the first student of Bhagavatam, and Parikshit, who was the second student, who Shukadev taught. And so to answer the question, he started by explaining who Parikshit was. And to do that, he went back to the end of the Mahabharata war, because the story of Parikshit is rooted there, where the Pandavas won the war, but the Kurus, somebody on the Kurus side tried to assassinate all the heirs. So then we got wrapped up in the story of how Krishna was dealing with all this stuff, and he managed to save the baby, the grandson of the Pandavas. He managed to save him in Uttara's womb from an attack. And then he left, finally, after months, he left Hastinapur, he left the Pandavas and went back to Dwarka, and now that story's finally done when he gets back to the palace of his queens. So the next chapter is going to begin with Shaunaka saying, all right, what about Parikshit? So Shaunaka says, now please tell us about Parikshit, the one whom Shuka enlightened by teaching the Bhagavatam. I didn't skip chapter 10, I just was skipping the numbering. They got the numbering wrong. We know that the master saved him from the terrible power of Ashwatthama's ultimate weapon while he was still in his mother's womb. So we know that much. That's the only time. Shaunaka is reminding Sutta, you got carried away talking about Krishna here. You were supposed to tell us about Parikshit. And the only thing that we heard about Parikshit was that he got saved while he was still in the womb from the Brahmastra. So far, that's what we know about him. And we're enthusiastic to learn about his birth, life, death, and afterlife. So this is also interesting for the astrology fans in attendance. This is gonna be an example. In this chapter, we have an example of evidence that Jataka or horoscopic or individual or natal astrology existed in these ancient times, roughly 3000 BC, a little bit before that. Unfortunately for us who are pretty involved in astrology, there's no specific detail. They don't talk about any sort of placements in a birth chart or anything. But what you're gonna get in this chapter is the tale about the reading. So you're gonna hear the predictions and the reading given by astrologers to Yudhishthir, but they don't talk about it in an astrological way. So let's get on with it. It's kind of interesting. Sutta replied, Parikshit's granduncle, King Yudhishthir, was a very moral and excellent ruler. Like his forefathers, so all the citizens in his kingdom were happy. He never tried to fulfill any personal ambitions. He only wanted to be useful, even if in the smallest way, to divine Krishna. The king's wealth, rituals, queens, brothers, kingdom, and sovereignty were famous throughout the three skies. Even gods desired what he had. But the king's mind had no hunger for anything because it was full of lotus-faced Krishna Mukunda. Gopi Gita is in the 10th division, not the 10th chapter. We're in the first division. So now that's the story of Yudhishthira. It's just tying the story that he told back to Yudhishthira. So Krishna left Hastinapur. Yudhishthira became the emperor. How did Yudhishthira's kingdom go? You got one paragraph about how great it was. Now, he's going to focus on Parikshit. While still in its mother's womb, the king's grandnephew began to suffer from the blast of a terrible weapon. It was then. So he's going back saying, remember that story about how Krishna saved Parikshit while he was in the womb? Well, now I'll tell you another interesting detail about that story. It was then, at that time, that the child saw someone else with him in the womb. So remember, when a child is at the late stage of gestation, like 7, 8, 9 months, it occasionally, with increasing occasion, it has conventional conscious awareness called Jagra state, where you're actually alert. So when this event and when this extreme heat came, and then some amazing stuff was going on around the child in the womb, he came to Jagra, which means external awareness. And he saw someone else with him, a small figure, very pure, pleasing to behold, with a black complexion, like a dark cloud surrounded by a lightning yellow clothes and a blazing golden crown. He had 4 beautifully long arms and earrings of the purest gold. So it's a lot of black and gold. And grace. He had 4 His eyes were red with anger, and there was a mace in his hand. So this is like Nishringade. Why is he angry? Because somebody's trying to hurt somebody. And how does he use his anger? To protect. This is the proper use for anger. His eyes were red with anger, and there was a mace in his hand. He moved like a shooting star, encircling the child. So he just went like an electron around a nucleus, and shielding the child from the blast. And you might be confused about this blast. It's a Brahmastra, so it's a focused nuclear detonation. So it may have harmed. It could have killed the child without even killing the mother. He moved like a shooting star, encircling the child and constantly swinging his mace, dissipating the blast like the sun evaporates fog. Astonished, the child thought, "Who is this?" As soon as he was seen, the all-attractive Hari disappeared. This is usually what happens. You saw it happen with Narada also. As soon as he was seen, the all-attractive Hari disappeared back into the inner recesses of reality. So he's always in the inner recesses of reality, but on occasion he comes to the external layer of it. The child would become famous as, this is the first canto, Raghuvar. The child became famous as what? The examiner. That's what the name Parikshit means, the examiner, which is funny because when I was a kid, I used to make my own magazine called The Inquirer, which is another way you could translate Parikshit. And also we have both The Examiner and Inquirer are sleazy tabloids in America. So why is he called the Examiner? Because after seeing that delightful vision while he was still in the womb, from the moment of his birth, he constantly kept thinking, who was that person that I saw? So every time he would look at anybody, he would think, is this the same? Could this be the same person? And then he would examine everybody. I guess not. And therefore he became known as Parikshit, somebody who examines everybody. So he would become famous as the examiner because in his search to again see that amazing person, he would examine everyone he met. Is this him? Thus he constantly contemplated Vishnu. So this is the birth of Parikshit, how Krishna conscious he was. It's amazing. This is the blessing of having something, an actual event in your life, like an actual darshan, even if it's momentary. He was born when the planets, so here's the candy for astrology fans. He was born when the planets became favorable for all the good fortune required to make destiny's heir, as powerful as his great-grandfather Pandu. So that's it. That's as specific astrologically as it gets. All it says is, all the planets became so favorable as you would have to have it for somebody to be able to become the emperor of the world. He was born when the planets became favorable for all the good fortune required to make the dynasty's heir. Sorry, not destiny. To make the dynasty's heir as powerful as his great-grandfather Pandu. So in other words, this child was born in a moment that would make him as powerful as anybody in his dynasty. Overflowing with affection, the king or the emperor, that's Yudhishthira, called the most learned scholars. So he called the most learned scholars like Dalmya and Kripa to read the auspicious astrological nativity of his newborn grandnephew. So at the moment of birth, he had the astrologers come and read the Jataka, the chakra, the sky, to read the chart, the birth chart of the child. But unfortunately for us astrologers, there's no description of the chart itself, just the results. But this does at least prove, or it is at least evidence, that in Yudhishthir's time, individual natal astrology was practiced. Unless you want to just be a typical scholar about it and say, well, maybe this is from a later revision. But this is at least some kind of evidence that you can bring to the table. Well aware of what should be done to celebrate the birth of the child, the king gave the scholars gifts of the highest quality: gold, cows, land, villages, elephants, and horses, and sumptuously fed them. So that's that for all you people out there who say astrologers shouldn't get paid. Especially on an auspicious occasion like the birth of a child, you better give gifts to the people who are doing things for your child, your marriage, or whatever. Well aware of what should be done to celebrate the birth of a child, look at how the king paid these guys. He gave them the highest quality: gold, cows, land, villages, elephants, and horses, and sumptuously fed them. Very satisfied, those intellectuals said, so here's their reading. This is the summary of the reading that they got. Yeah, modern scholars are dating the extant version linguistically to about 1500 years old, which is fine because it's a Purana and it gets narrated and updated. But fine, whatever. The story, it's the traditionalists have already explained in the Bhagavatam itself when it was written. It was written, and you should just go back and read the rest, listen to the rest of my videos on that. It was written at the beginning of Kali Yuga. It was written by Vyasa and then was spoken by Shukadev and then learned by Sutta and then a little bit later explained by Sutta and then recorded. And then the recording is passed down. So the oldest edition that we currently have by linguistic analysis is 1500 years. Doesn't mean the core of the book was created at that time. So here's the reading that they gave. The intellectuals said, this spotless child, so maybe you had an Amala Yoga, this spotless child will certainly be the foremost in the dynasty. Foremost in the whole dynasty, great. Unstoppable destiny intended to destroy him, but out of affection for you, all-powerful and all-pervading Vishnu rescued him. Thus the boy will be famous throughout the world by the name. Another name for Parikshit is Vishnu Rahata, which means Vishnu rescued, the one who Vishnu rescued. Undoubtedly, he is a great soul, extremely blessed, and is the pinnacle of divine love. Then the blessed king asked, so then Yudhishthira asked him a question. Okay, great. Now give me more detail. Will this boy have glory and fame by following the footsteps of his forebears, great souls, famous as pious philosopher kings? So he's coming in a family of really high-class people. Famous philosopher kings, is he going to live up to that? The intellectuals replied by naming each important trait of a king, one of the forebears, and each forebearer who most perfectly exemplified each. So in this, you'll see what the important traits of our king. That's the main thing to take away. And the basic thing is, this child, Parikshit's going to have the best of all these qualities. So one important thing for a king to do is to maintain the king's dependence. The primary duty of a leader is to take care of the people that he or she is leading. That's the primary duty. So in maintaining the citizens, he will be exactly like Ikshvaku, Manu's son. So he's going to be historically great at taking care of his subordinates, maintaining the citizens. The other thing the leader has to have is truthfulness and obedience to teachers. In truthfulness and obedience to teachers, he will be exactly like Rama, Dasharath's son. So the king has to be truthful and obedient to intellectuals. This is not like Donald Trump at all, who doesn't follow science at all. But actually the scientists or the thinkers should be leading the society. In giving charity, and the king or the governors or the politicians should be implementing what the intelligent people figure out. Not that the leaders and the kings and the priests and the managers come up with their own plans, but they enforce and implement the plans of the thinkers. That's the way it worked in Vedic society. In giving charity and shelter, so that's the other thing that the king has to do. He has to be charitable and give shelter to people. He will be like Shibi. Shibi is a famous person because he earned the right to go to Indra's paradise, but he wanted to give it to other people. In expanding the renown of his kin by performing sacrifices, he will be like Dushanta's son. Dushanta's son is Bhishma? No, Dushanta's son is Bharata. And Bharata is the head. In bowmanship, he will be equal to Arjun. He will be as unstoppable as an inferno. So a king should be unstoppable. As insurmountable as an ocean. As powerful as a lion. As unwavering as the Himalaya. As forbearing as the earth. As patient as parents. And as merciful and generous as grandparents. So inadvertently, you get good advice here for parents and grandparents. The primary trait that a parent should have is patience. Don't lose your cool. Your kid's going to drive you nuts. But don't react out of hastiness and rashness to it. Always be patient with the child. It takes them a while to be able to do what adults can normally do. So parents, first and foremost, have to have patience. And then grandparents should not be like parents at all. Grandparents should be constantly merciful and generous. So it's very disappointing when a grandparent tries to be an authoritarian figure. They shouldn't be an authoritarian figure. That duty falls to the father mainly, a bit to the mother. So there you go. In giving shelter to all living beings, he will be like Shiva and Vishnu, who shelters even the goddess of fortune. In having all glorious spiritual qualities, he will be like Krishna, to whom he is devoted. Qualities means like things that you can perceive about him. So he's going to be handsome and famous and beautiful and all that stuff, just like Krishna. In altruism, he'll be like Ranti Dev. I maybe have a footnote on Ranti Dev. Ranti Dev is a king famous for being virtually obsessed with giving everything he had to others. In following rules, he will be like Yayati. Yayati, my footnote is, very ancient king, performed thousands of different Vedic sacrifices. In patience, he will be like Bali. Bali was very patient because so patience means to stay on course, basically, and do what you said you were going to do. So that's another important thing about parents. Follow through on your promises. And Bali did that. In saintly devotion, he'll be like Prahlad. So as far as Prahlad and Shringadev, Parikshit is the equal of Prahlad. He will conduct many sacrifices. What is my footnote on this? We'll skip this footnote. He will be the follower of the experienced. It's very important for a king to be a follower of the right people, of the experienced, of the wise. He will father many philosopher kings. For the sake of world peace, he will curb the insubordinate and extinguish the cantankerous. They also spoke about the boy's glorious end. So maybe Yudhishthira asked him, how is he going to die? This is because they spoke about it. This was also a couple of interesting ancillary points for astrologers. It is perfectly okay to give a reading to somebody who's just born. Obviously, here it is. And it's also okay to talk about how a person will die. Frankly, though, you got to realize that there's problems with it, especially since if we're not that great at astrology. You just have to make sure that you don't pretend that you know exactly what's going to happen when you don't. You're figuring out what has happened because you know more about the symbolism than most people do, but it doesn't mean that you know everything. So anyway, they did talk about the boy's glorious end. They said his death. That's a distraction. We'll talk about that at some other time. His death will come from the dragon Taksha. So he's going to die at the hands of or the fangs of a dragon. Dragon is Naga. And as a result of a curse from a child of a twice-born, oh my God, that's Yudhishthira must have been horrified. My grandchild is going to be cursed by a Brahmin and die from a dragon as a result. When he hears of this, but when he hears of the curse, he's going to cast off all his attachments and take full shelter in Hari and inquire about the true goal of the soul from the learned son of Vyasa. He will then leave his body beside the Ganges and go directly to the abode of fearlessness. So at first Yudhishthira was a bit sad probably, and then he was okay. He was psyched. So now you have a hint of where he heard the Bhagavatam. Yeah. Once Parikshit heard that he was cursed to die, then he said, all right, I'm going to prepare for death. So he left everything behind and went to the bank of the Ganges, and then he inquired about the true goal of the soul from Shukadev, and that's where he heard the Bhagavatam. After advising the king, the learned experts of natal astrology returned to their homes, wondrously paid. We can do this whole chapter today. The young prince grew quickly and luxuriantly like the waxing moon, day after day, under the care of his many parents. It was then that the king wanted to perform a horse sacrifice, hoping to reduce the negative effects of fighting with his family. But he realized that the treasury consisted of nothing but taxes and fines, so Krishna told Arjuna and his brothers how to find and procure an abundance of wealth from the north. This is just a reference to a tale which is long and it's probably told in Mahabharata. The footnote here is that long ago, Shiva literally gave a mountain of gold to an ancient king named Marut. Eventually, the path to the mountain was lost and his treasure became inaccessible, but Krishna told the Pandavas how to get it. And so with that gold, they could perform the Vedic ceremony properly. With that wealth, the king, the son of Dharma, could procure enough ingredients to perform the sacrifice 3 times. Such was his fear of the evil effect of his deeds. Hari was pleased and attended these functions out of affection for his beloved devotees. He continued to live with them for a few months. So this is, you see, it's not in sync. This is what's happening before Krishna left Dwarka. Because he went back and he told the story of how Parikshit was born, and then they got the astrology reading from him. Krishna was still there at the time. Then Yudhishthira agreed to become the emperor, performed the coronation ceremony, and did it 3 times just because he felt like he had done so many bad karmas by doing the war. Then the king reluctantly allowed Krishna to leave for Dwarka, surrounded by Arjuna and his other friends and relatives. All right? So you kind of sort of got an intro to Parikshit. And we'll hear more. Next chapter is Vidura. You're going to find out about Vidura. It's a little interesting diversion or tangent. But it's kind of important because it will wrap up the story of the Kurus, what happened to the losing side. All right, guys, I want to thank everybody for coming, especially my old friends, Triv, Balaram Shakti, everybody else who maybe I didn't see your name. And I'll see you tomorrow, right? Because it's still Wednesday for me. So we still have 2 more days. Oh, we just got this question from Bardo. So Avatar manifests himself in this world not as a person, but as some kind of harmonious relationships exemplary to a particular time. No, as a person. People have relationships. But the whole thing is included in the absolute truth. The Krishna and the relationship and the person with whom he's relating. Okay? All right, guys. See you tomorrow.